And I'm noticing the depth, which I already knew, but even appreciating it more of the means whereby of the Alexander technique.
Yes, the
Hmm.
means whereby, which is a formula for living.
Yes.
It's Alexander technique, both inhibition and means whereby, and the capacity to direct. Those are all things that you just want to apply to life. You don't even have to worry about your postures for your body. Just see if you're applying those concepts to the way you're living, and you can do better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so we can just start at the beginning here. We can, with your background, with the technique and how you got, like, what attracted you to it.
What attracted me to the Alexander technique? Well, I was young and I was looking for something that would help me with my posture. I had awful posture, really, really awful posture. It was so bad that people in the street would stop and say, then this was in South Africa, they said, stand up straight, girlie, stand up straight, because I was so hunched over. And I really, the more hunched over I was, the more people would advise me to stand up straight, the worse I would feel about myself, the more I would hunch over.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was from when I was, probably before 10 years of age. And I went all through my teenage years just watching in dismay as my body was sort of collapsing. I remember I used to stand in front of the mirror and I'd sort of straighten up. And of course, we wouldn't even use those terms in Alexander technique anymore. We'd say lengthen up. But I would straighten up and I'd pull on my shoulders, put my shoulders back, suck my stomach in, do all those standard cultural directions for posture. And while I was watching, I would watch my body collapse back down again.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't realize, and it's very interesting, I was from a tennis playing family, and what I didn't realize is that my body was so strong. My muscles were so strong. I was a big sports player and I was athletic. And that strength was literally pulling me down. Literally. We know that term in Alexander technique. If you kind of hunched over and you're shortening down the front, we call that pulling down. And that is the strength of one's own muscles. So if you are very strong, especially if you do a lot of abdominal work, but you don't have the true lengthening going on through your entire neuromuscular system, that strength is going to actually work against you and pull you downwards. And that's what I was doing. I was literally fighting with myself. And I'd watch in dismay. I'd be standing in front of the mirror and I'd be looking and I would just start sinking. And it was a feeling of weakness that was coming from strength. I was already learning that concept that the thing and its opposite live in the same space, and that your strength becomes your weakness and your weakness becomes your strength. So literally, my strong muscles were generating this weak posture.
Mm-hmm.
How fascinating is that? And you see people trying to strengthen their muscles to improve their posture, and they could be doing themselves a bigger mischief, actually, if they're not doing it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this goes into the whole idea of the balance.
It is. It's the yin yang balance. It's the strength weakness balance. Everything's a balance thing. Indeed. I do agree.
Okay. And so you were looking in the mirror, you had the problem with posture, and then how did you find out about the Alexander technique and that this would be something that would be useful?
I had a boyfriend whose sister was training in drama at the Royal Academy for Dramatic Arts in London, RADA. And she came back to Cape Town on a visit. And we went to the swimming pool, the university swimming pool. I'll never forget this day. It's emblazoned on my mind and probably on my spirit and soul too. And we were just sitting there and she said, I just came from a posture lesson. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, I came in, there's one Alexander teacher in South Africa, and she's here in Rondebosch, and her name is Joyce Roberts. And I said, you must tell me everything. This is what I've been looking for. And Bryson, it was so strange. I had sat in high school thinking, I was sitting and I was looking at the other children in the class with me. We were all teenagers then, of course, it was high school. And I was thinking, there's got to be something somewhere in the world that can help me with my posture. it's not just me, it's everybody. We were all sitting hunched over in our desks, collapsed,
Yeah.
with our legs crossed and corkscrewed around each other and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking, there's got to be something somewhere in the world that can help me. And it was right across the road from my high school is where Joyce Roberts was teaching the Alexander technique, the only teacher in South Africa.
Wow.
And she was right there across the road from where I was having that thought. Can you believe it? And so I was looking out into the world, and what I wanted was right there in my own front door, as it were. It was so interesting. And that taught me a lesson too, that what you want needs to be available to you. It is available to you. You just have to find it. Mm-hmm. And there it was. And there were even people in my high school class who were actually having Alexander lessons, but nobody wanted to talk about it. I mean, we're talking about the 1970s. We're talking about teenagers. Teenagers are the same, no matter which generation, they're still teenagers. Mm-hmm. And they don't, you don't want to talk about something like that in something to do with your body, right. You're a teenager, your body's not your best friend.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know, even though there were people in my high school class who were actually having Alexander lessons, and unfortunately nobody told me. But I found it soon after high school. It was a few years later. It would have been 1977 when I found the Alexander technique and Joyce Roberts. And she really had a good name for herself. A lot of people went to her. She alone kept the flag of the Alexander technique flying in South Africa, and then she trained 3 of us. And we went from there.
Oh, wow. So you had really intensive one-on-one training with her small group.
Well, it was a little bit strange, our training, because actually in order to have a recognized Alexander training course, you needed to have 2 Alexander teachers, which I think is sensible. You don't want to learn anything from only one person.
Yeah.
But we couldn't fulfill that requirement in South Africa. So actually, I was so young and naive because I was in my 20s when we embarked on trying to train as Alexander teachers. I suggested, why don't we ask them to help us? Why don't we ask the English Society to help us? So we wrote to the British Society, the Society of Teachers of the Alexander Technique, STAT. And we said, look, we want to train, and is there something we can do? And they said, I don't know, what can you do? There aren't 2 teachers. Mm-hmm. And then we suggested, why don't we go to a training course in England to be examined, as it were, to check that our standard was correct, and also to do training there so that we're not only training with our one teacher. Right. And so we had to set up a sort of a going back and forth from Cape Town to London and getting ourselves trained, and also spending time at the Constructive Teaching Center. It was the school that we ended up working with, and that was Walter Carrington. It was incredibly good fortune. We ended up, as luck would have it, by working with Walter Carrington in London, and that's where I finished my training and got the sort of stamp of approval and the official certification. So we couldn't certify in South Africa, but they made a plan for us. We were very lucky that they said, come on, let's help these people in South Africa, and they did. And that was great. And it's interesting because actually in South Africa was a giant court case against someone who'd libeled Alexander, and Alexander had to fly to South Africa to defend his good name, and won the court case in South Africa. So South Africa wasn't on the top of the list of Alexander teachers. Good books, but Alexander did win the court case in South Africa, and that's an amazing documentation, was the trial and the court case, this libel suit, and proving that the Alexander technique does do what it does. It was proven in South Africa, in the South African courtroom of all places. How amazing. Very interesting story there too.
Yeah, there's so much I could ask you from that.
I know. It's too much to talk about, isn't there?
Yeah. That you noticed this in high school, that you had this awareness about you to notice the other kids twisted up in your own sense. Like,
yes,
that wasn't on my mind at that age. And so that's remarkable, I think, right there. And then,
right. Well, it's a girl thing. It's a girl thing, people would actually say to me, you're so pretty, and it's such a pity that you've got such bad posture. It was very hurtful. And I was given a nickname of Gorilla.
Oh.
People, because of the way I walked, I was hunched over, so my arms sort of hung out, and a shame that the one boy in my class, he said, you can always tell when it's Vivien walking up the road because because she walks like a gorilla.
Yeah. that helps
I'm
spur
laughing
the
now.
awareness.
It was terrible at the time.
Yeah.
Giving me a frog in my throat. I have to drink my water. All right. Memories of being the gorilla.
Yeah, I talk a lot on this show with people, and it comes back to school a lot about being forced to sit in desks in this unnatural posture that we're forced to be in all day long, from the time we're developing in first grade all the way through, and just
I
how
don't
that.
know. Schooling systems are very strange. I've got a slightly deformed finger from writing when I was a little girl, because they teach you to write before you have fine motor coordination. So you use the muscles of gross motor coordination in order to control the pen. And that's what really, really messes with your posture and really messes with your sitting. Is and you shouldn't learn to write until the neuromuscular system is developed enough, and that there is such a thing as fine motor coordination. So you mustn't learn to write when you're 5 and 6 years old. Rather learn to write when you're 10 and 11 years old. Of course, now they don't even learn to write. So what am I talking about? I'm totally out of date. Excuse me, because you've got to learn to use a keyboard.
Yeah.
What would I know? I'm watching my granddaughters figuring out that any old toy can be used as a phone or a remote and banging on it, because they're so digitally oriented. There's a big generation gap. So if we talk about our desks and schools and sitting and what we had to do and learning to do printing and cursive, it's not the same anymore. So I don't know what they're getting up to, and I don't want to. Because if I don't have any say in improving it, I don't really want to know. I want to rather be an ostrich.
Yeah, I think then there's seems to be like two, there's probably several, but two obvious ones to avoid a situation like having to sit, or then there's a technique like the Alexander technique to transcend the problem.
Well, you have to be careful. I like what you're saying, because a certain amount of awareness about how frequently to get up and move, for example, would be helpful. I know we did a workshop with Ted Diamond. He came and did some workshops here in Cincinnati, and he really handled it well. He really applied his knowledge of the Alexander technique, and he would get us to take frequent rests and breaks, and none of us was tired at the end of the day, because he got us taking a break before fatigue was setting in. And so he really applied the rhythms and the means whereby of the Alexander technique to teaching a course. And I learned a lot just by observing that aspect, never mind the fantastic information about voice and anatomy and so on that he was sharing with us. So it was very, very powerful. But just to see how he handled and structured the teaching situation, which was not hands-on experiential by any means. It was slideshows and a presentation of information and everything. And yet he built that Alexander rhythm and insight into how he presented the course. And it was a really big difference from how we felt at the end of the day compared to when attending other workshops. I was really impressed, very, very impressed. I try to follow it. I try to apply that. And it's simple. Just get up and take a break every 20 minutes. Don't wait for that hour to be up. Interrupt the hour with a short stand-up break. Breathe. Change your breathing pattern, and then sit back down again, and your attention span will be improved and your comfort levels will be improved. Easy. Remember to interrupt in order to avoid fatigue.
Simple enough.
It's a good one.
So, a lot of people don't know what the Alexander technique is, and so maybe I can ask you to try to do the very difficult job of explaining what we're actually talking about here. So me and you know, because we're practitioners, but a lot of people have never heard of it. So how would you?
I know, and Alexander teachers make it so difficult for themselves because they want to avoid using the word posture. So I would say, let's put the word posture back into our understanding of the Alexander technique, because it's our best word to depict what the technique is about. But to understand that posture isn't and shouldn't be a static thing, And it's not something you do. It's a very dynamic way of engaging your muscles throughout the day. Even when you're sleeping, there's a posture for sleeping. And if you put the dynamics and the sense of movement and the sense of flexibility and the sense of ever changing back into the word posture and stop trying to think of it as a positioning of the body, then you're going to get a better use of the word posture. And I'm interested that I put the word use in there, because the word that Alexander teachers like to use for that is the word use of the self. So we don't split mind and body. We see mind and body as what you think is what you get. And that is, that is a very factual thing that we must understand. For example, if you're walking down a flight of steps and you think there's another step, your entire nervous system, your entire neuromuscular coordination is organized by the thought that there is another step. And then you sort of crash into the ground because all of you was prepared behind this thought and organized in accordance with this thought. And Alexander Technique is taking that clarity that our thoughts organize us in a very specific way and give our entire system all kinds of messages to do with that thought. That's what the Alexander Technique is using. And it is therefore the thinking person's technique. It is the thinking person's way of dealing with the fact that we are physically incarnated. And as we start to reduce the amount of interference from thought to actuality, from mind to body, there should not be an interference. We should be an integrated whole. And the more we can be that integrated whole, the better we are going to function. And that is what the Alexander Technique is dealing with. It's dealing with this clarity of how to think so we can get what we want. And that get what we want is in our physical lives, in the way that we move. It's in stress and pain reduction, but it's also in all our behaviors and everything that we do, because we're talking about our thoughts and we're talking about our lives. And we're not really reducing in any way to this is about the body or this is about the mind. We don't split it up like that. Our behavior is our behavior, whether it's a physical pattern or whether it's an emotional pattern or whether it's a thought pattern. They're all going together, hand in glove. They're all linked to each other. They're all really one thing. And when we start to separate them and put interference in, that's when we have issues.
Wow, that's a brilliant definition. That's really good, very comprehensive. Exactly what
and
I
I think
wanted.
we should say who the Alexander Technique is for, because I think that the question, what is the Alexander Technique, is really a set of questions. And so who is it for? It's for anyone who wants to improve the way that they are functioning. And so you will get people that are in pain wanting the Alexander Technique because it helps with like back pain, it helps with headaches, it helps with any of those kind of dynamics where there's a muscular involvement that's generating the pain, or a muscular confusion that's generating the pain. And that, of course, we are all subject to for all kinds of good reasons that we can't avoid. Like we talked about sitting in desks at school and we sit at computers and so on. So it can be to go from a state of pain or some dysfunction into a more functional state. But the most important thing to remember is that the Alexander Technique is used by actors because it gives them skills with their physical direction and the way they express themselves physically. That is absolutely fabulous, as well as you can't have, actors with bad posture don't get jobs. It's just a fact. It's okay for them to put on bad posture when they need it. Christopher Reeve, when he acted Superman, he was a student of the Alexander Technique because he got that at college in New York, where he went to acting school, and it's not a part of the curriculum. And so when he was Superman, he'd direct up as we do in the Alexander Technique and open and widen and broaden. And then when he was in Clark Kent, he would pull down and he'd hunch his shoulders and he'd put his head down and so on. So, that was a really good example. And of course, very sad what did happen to him with the riding accident. And I have no doubt that he engaged the Alexander Technique in his thinking when he had to deal with that ghastly catastrophe as well. But because that's the Alexander technique. It's a recipe for living, a very good recipe for living as well. And so, it's for functional. So you actors, athletes, opera singers, all kinds of singers. They, lots and lots of famous names. These people avail themselves of the wondrous, wondrous thing that the Alexander technique is. And there's nothing else like it. There are spin-offs like Feldenkrais and things like that. There's a kind of an element of similarity, but there is nothing quite like the Alexander technique. It is unique unto itself, and it's not easy. It's a lovely thing to receive an Alexander lesson. It's not an easy thing to learn how to teach it. And it's not easy to learn. And, at that higher level. But it's a wonderful thing, and it's very relaxing. It's very, very enjoyable. It's the best lesson, most enjoyable lesson you can have, except perhaps, Bryson, for some of the lessons you give, which I know are excellent too. I know that you've availed yourself of the wonders of the Alexander technique to enhance the experience for your students.
Mm-hmm. No, I use Alexander technique every day, all day long.
Exactly. Me too.
Yeah.
Once you know about it, you can't unknow it.
Oh. And you wouldn't want to. It's like something was missing, and now, like I think of it like these internal principles, like so you were saying with Superman, with this directing down and up. So it's really an idea of awareness and attitude, and then the body's projecting like the internal ethos of the individual. And so, like you begin to recognize emotional states much quicker. Like, oh, I'm depressed, and you can look in the mirror. I can see my body expressing that, or I'm happy, or I'm neutral. Whatever it is, it's like and it just continues to develop in the practitioner. The more you play with it, and you can play with it mentally and physically, which the integration of both.
Exactly, and play with it is a lovely way to put it, because you and I, we tend to take things a bit too seriously, don't we? And I'm especially glad that you're using a more playful word to depict, because we do want to play, and we mustn't take things too seriously. And it's one of the things that we want to remember with the Alexander technique is it's also about having a better attitude. The word posture and the word attitude can sometimes be interchangeable, and that attitude can show up, and we want to be a little freer. We're always learning in the Alexander technique, free your neck, free the tension, free yourself of all this tension. And one of the ways to do this is to take a more playful, fun attitude, not be so serious and intense all the time.
Yeah.
Just 90% of the time. Yeah. Just kidding.
Well, when you first come to at least for me, when I first came to it, I was so just really taken with it, just blown away, and I just wanted to know it right away. And that attitude interfered with the learning because it was so serious in some way.
That is
where I became rigid in my old patterns of how I should learn, and bad experiences in school or whatever, instead of being open and being like, it's okay, just the engaging with it day after day, it'll organically continue to come. You're on the right path here, and be okay with that.
That's exactly. I so agree with you. One day I just thought, I was so impatient. I wanted to be able to do it. And then one day I realized there is no destination here. You just have to get on the train. And once you're on the train, you have to be satisfied. And then you must just watch the scenery go by. Because it's important. There is no destination. We must just get on the train. And that helped. Without the Alexander technique, I wouldn't have reached that kind of clarity, because I'm a very goal-oriented person. And I know you are too. And I know you're also goal-oriented. And the Alexander technique really helps us, doesn't it? It helps us to remember to pay attention to the means whereby, and to be there in the present with what's happening, and paying the attention to what the quality of what is happening right now, not some ephemeral goal that actually can never be reached. What is the quality of this moment now? And is there a way I can make this now moment better? Because if there is, why don't we do that rather than worry about the future? The future can never come. It's never. We're in yesterday's future right now. So now is where we must pay attention. And that's what I love about the Alexander technique. Before the Alexander technique, I was studying psychology. And they talk about being in the present. And I wonder what it means, being in the present. This is all 17, 18 years old of me. What does being in the present mean? And there was, what was clearly missing was the means whereby aspect.
Yes.
I wasn't saying this is how to be in the present. There's just say, be in the present.
Yeah.
Then I went and had Alexander lessons with Joyce Roberts. And I'm standing there and I'm going, oh, I'm being in the present. And the Alexander technique didn't lecture me about being in the present or even present it as a concept. It just taught me how to be in the present by teaching me about means whereby, about how to be in this moment. And that in this moment, I'm thinking about this moment and I'm interacting with this moment. I'm not preoccupied with the future while I'm being in this moment. And that's what I learned as a practical, real thing. It was mind-blowing. It was fantastic. I mean, that moment of joy when I went, oh, I'm being in the present. It was a beautiful, beautiful moment for me. I remember it. I remember the light in the room, and I remember my teacher, Joyce Roberts, and I just remember the feeling and the sensation of the aha of a concept, an abstract concept turning into a experience, an actual reality, an actual experience. It was delicious. What can I say?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think too, like when we first come to the technique and we're not aware of that, we're going to use the information we have to approach learning something. And the Alexander continues to pull you in, pull you in. You don't realize there's no end to this thing because you haven't been involved with something that there's no end to. Everything's had an end and a grade and an expectation, and then you come into something unique like this, and you're in a lot of ways disoriented. So you use the old tools to try to find yourself in the new place, and that's where Alexander's so amazing with these principles of inhibition and means whereby.
Correct. Inhibition, means whereby, and because directing is in a lot of different disciplines. Like if you want to be a dancer or you want to sing or any activity, you have to direct. You have to send a message from your brain to tell your body what you want it to do, or so directing is familiar to us. But consciously directing via the Alexander technique on top of learning how to inhibit, which means stop your habitual pattern from happening so that you can allow something different to happen from the habitual. Then if we once we learn that skill of inhibition, then our directing can come through in a better way because we can get what we want. You first have to empty out the thing that is happening. You have to clear that. You can't put more into the full cup. You've got to empty the cup and then you can put more in. And of course, that's what Alexander technique teaches us how to do, is how to stop that habit from filling the space so that there's something else can happen. And what we also taught is that there are some things that will do themselves if you can get that interference out of the way. And that's what we want in the Alexander technique, isn't it? We want the right thing to do itself. In other words, our birthright thing, the reflex actions of our postural system, the natural responses of the physical and our coordination to be able to go into play because they're not being interfered with. Those things are our birthright, but unfortunately they get a little bit twisted up and they get interrupted. And so we have to learn how to take out those interruptions and those twists. And that's our inhibition work in the Alexander technique. And I was saying earlier that it's hard to learn. That's the part that's hard to learn. And that's the part that gets taken out by the copycat techniques that have seen a good thing in the Alexander technique, but they want to make it more accessible. They want to make it a bit easier. So they take out the inhibition part. And yet that's the part that really makes the Alexander technique the special opportunity that it is.
I was going to say that's the doorway, at least it was for me.
Yes.
When you were talking before about looking at yourself in the mirror and trying to correct posture, to us, I think it's obvious. It's like you're directing more on bad habits, but because you haven't got rid of the underlying habit, you're never going to figure out the new thing. You're going to create more tensions, more problems, more distortion because the inhibition wasn't understood.
Yes. And of course, the thing is that, if you go to an Alexander lesson, you might not see the inhibition. And that was something that puzzled me because I'd go and have these absolutely wonderful Alexander lessons with Walter Carrington.
Uh-huh.
Another, but he never ever actually mentioned inhibition, and yet I knew inhibition was the key.
Hmm.
I knew it was there, but I couldn't. It was an invisible presence,
Yeah.
and yet it's the thing that makes it work. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, like, how does this all fit together? I was getting like really baffled and puzzled. And
Yeah.
then I realized, no, inhibition is the water that you're swimming in when you're having an Alexander lesson. The entire structure of an Alexander lesson is set up so
Yeah.
that you are learning how to inhibit.
Hmm.
And the teacher is giving you the inhibition information with his or her hands.
Hmm.
And that is how it's being transmitted. So an Alexander teacher puts her hands on the person's physical body and inhibits some of the muscle patterns that are getting in the way, and then helps the person move without those interfering muscle patterns. So you go directly to the experience and then you build from there.
Hmm.
And I like to give people the experience of inhibition before I ever explain anything about it, because I find that's more powerful. But if you give people explanations, they want to hook it onto what they already know.
Hmm.
And we're trying to teach people what they don't know.
Hmm.
You don't need to come to me to learn what you know.
Hmm.
There's no point in that. You go to an Alexander teacher, you're going to discover what you don't know, and you must learn how to hand over and allow. A very, very big word in the Alexander technique. You've got to learn how to allow.
Hmm.
And that is thereby hangs a big tail that wraps around the universe, even. Mm.
Yeah, that was my big struggle. So I distinct as you're talking, I distinctly remember lessons. In fact, I looked some of mine up. I took many notes on me and your private lessons. And the inhibition would be there with the hands. I would feel myself jerking against your direction and recognize that's my habit. This is her keeping me from doing
Yes,
that habit.
yes,
But the tendency was still to come out of the lessons and think about them and try to do the right thing. The inhibition was the struggle.
yes,
I
that's
couldn't
right.
just to,
Especially when you know a lot and you want to apply it. And then one day you suddenly realize, no, it's this thing of trying that I'm doing. That's actually what's getting in my way.
Mhm.
It's thinking that I know that's getting in my way. It's this belief that I need tension to hold myself upright and not fall over.
Yeah,
That's where what I need to inhibit. It's got layers to it, and it's got subtleties to it, and then it's got some obvious stuff too.
yeah,
So it's not all difficult, and it is all enjoyable. That I
yeah,
can
yeah,
guarantee.
yeah.
I've never known. Actually, I heard of someone once saying that they didn't enjoy an Alexander lesson, but then they had one with me and became and went on to sign up and become an Alexander teacher. So went and did a course after a lesson with me. After telling me, this person said, no, he hates the Alexander technique. He's had 2 bad experiences with it.
Really?
And then he said, oh, okay. Then he discovered I could cook nice macrobiotic food. So he thought,
Yeah.
well, I'll try the Alexander lesson with this person. She's a good cook. Which I think is the funniest gateway ever. And then he went home to Massachusetts and signed up on an Alexander training course straight after that, which I thought was very interesting after telling
Yeah.
me he didn't like it.
That's
I don't think he ever taught, but he was fascinated.
yeah.
And I think that's the thing to remember is that Alexander teachers also have personalities, and you want to find the right fit for you. You know,
Mhm.
it's important, and you want to get what you want out of an Alexander process. You don't want to be told what you're supposed to be getting.
Right.
It's a recipe for living, and it's your life,
Yeah.
and you want to get out of it what you want for yourself. Very, very important.
Hmm. Yeah. I never had a bad lesson. I had many lessons, and some were better than others, but I enjoyed them all. And then when I met you, I'd already had a lot under my belt, and I was just completely impressed with you. And I knew this is where I
Oh, thank
stop
you.
right here. This is the one where you need to spend your time.
Oh, and what was it? What do you think was what impacted you? Because I think there's a lot of information in hearing from the other side of the desk, as it were. What do you think impacted you so much?
Yeah. So with yours, you just gave me so much to think about. Like you had me on the table, which was showing me my residual tensions when you would lift an arm, and I was feeling myself holding in certain patterns. And then on the floor with my head and moving around and sitting, but it was the nuances you had. So you were like, you have to accept this because I had an injury at the time, and you picked up on it. You're like, you're not shifting your weight here. You're holding, and you just pointed out these much more subtle aspects of my use than the other teachers didn't have that depth. They would put
But
their
the
hands on to make me
detail,
feel, yeah,
yeah,
the
you wanted the
detail.
detail. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
and
yes.
like you said,
No,
I had
and
intellectualized
that's
it
a gift
already.
that I have too.
Yeah.
I have to admit, yeah. Hmm.
And you move so well. You would do things like you would show me the way you would do the position of mechanical advantage or monkey, and I just saw the way you move it. I was like, I want to be able to move that way, and I recognize I'm not. I have the tensions that's preventing me from doing that. I was in good shape. I was healthy. I was strong, but my
And more,
movement was
much more flexible than me as well.
flexible versus.
Able to do a lot of different things.
Hmm.
But monkey is very interesting, and of course, monkeys, like if you're standing upright and then you go as if you were going halfway to the chair, and then you
Hmm.
pause in that position. That's the position we call monkey. So your
Hmm.
knees are bent, your ankles are bent, your hips are bent, but your spine is lengthened
Hmm.
and straight, but at an angle.
Hmm.
Maybe like a 45-degree angle to the pelvis, and that's a position we call monkey. And we move through monkey all the time, as we move to sit in the chair, or ideally we're moving. If we bend to pick something up, we must bend our knees, and
Hmm.
our hip joints and our ankle joints must bend simultaneously, the right amount. And that's what monkey is that availability. And so it is very interesting how few people can do a good monkey, no matter how excellent they are at sports, no matter how well coordinated they are, because monkey will reveal what's
Yeah.
tight and not participating in that availability to the movement.
Hmm.
But you see monkey in every sport. When you ski downhill, you're in monkey. When you wait to receive a tennis shot, you're in monkey.
Hmm.
All sports, when you in martial arts, I did a lot of taekwondo at one point. All martial arts have monkey in it, but they stylize it. Every sport stylize it in accordance with the dynamics of that particular sport. But every sport has monkey in it.
Yeah.
Every day we go through monkey many, 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 many times a day,
Hmm.
because every time we're moving, raising and lowering our bodies, we want to be bending our knees, our ankles, and our hip joints,
Hmm.
and not making joints in our spine. And so that is so important. And I like to think of myself as the queen of monkey,
Yeah.
because I am very keen on helping people to develop their monkey correctly, because it's revelationary. It's
Yeah.
revelationary who can and can't. I mean, usually the runners, especially long distance. Well, actually, I don't know if it's especially long distance runners, but runners and sprinters, long distance runners, they can hardly do monkey. Their leg muscles are so strong
Yeah.
that they don't have the tissue release and the capacity to lengthen, specifically the quadriceps,
Hmm.
sufficiently to allow for a free and flowing monkey configuration. Is
Yeah.
very, very interesting to me. So it's a very balancing technique, and it is the best way to strengthen your back as well. Because the back is tricky. It doesn't actually, is no such thing as back muscles. There are muscles that are in the back, but the back itself doesn't have a muscle of its own.
Right.
It's a fascinating thing to look at the anatomy of the back,
Hmm.
because actually the back is the meeting place of your arms and legs.
Hmm. Well, that was me. I was the runner. I mean, I did many things, but I also had the running, and the
Yes.
monkey was something that presented an immediate problem. And I even came up with a term after meeting you. I was in a class because, like you said, I was doing yoga, teaching yoga, martial arts, all this running, whatever. But I noticed I had all this quote unquote flexibility, and then I noticed people getting up off the mats, and I came up with the term stiff flexible. In the class, they're flexible,
Yes.
but getting up and down off the floor, they look like just awful. They struggled with it. They looked uncoordinated, and so I came up with this term stiff flexible. They looked so stiff, and they walked out of the room stiffly. It wasn't fluid, and it was a head scratcher because I'm like, we spend all this time doing yoga. We're flexible. Put our legs behind our heads and handstand, headstand, whatever. But the movement quality wasn't there.
Right. Right. The inside detail, and
Ah,
and that's the thing with yoga, isn't it? And that's a big difference. People say, well, they want to know, is the Alexander technique like yoga, because they want to relate it to something
right.
they already know. And it isn't even a little bit like yoga. I mean, they
Mm-mm.
both deal with the body and so on. And so it's important to be clear that when you do yoga, you're doing a set of exercises. When you do the Alexander technique, you're just talking about life.
Yeah.
And it's for what you're doing in every second. As we're sitting here talking to each other, we can be applying the Alexander technique, what we're doing. I mean, you can secretly be stretching your leg, as so many yogi practitioners do. They're always adding a little stretch in while they're waiting in line and do a little extra stretch here and there. But you're doing something, right?
Yeah.
In Alexander technique, it's the opposite. You're stopping that constant doing. You're stopping the habitual doing. You're stopping the patterns, and it's about not doing something. It's not about doing something. And if we not do our pattern, if we manage to stop our pattern, our habitual pattern, then we become available for something else. And as long as that habitual pattern is sitting there, we're not available to the new thing or the other thing.
And we got to know it's there because it's running through all the time, but we're not aware. We don't have that awareness.
Right.
Which was also one of the early things I had already signed on with you at this point, but I remember we had to do when we could put our hands on you for table work when you became the subject. And nothing. We just barely put our hand on the shoulder just to get used to the position. And you were like, you have tension in your lower right foot or something. And I was like, wow, I do. And just for me putting my hand on you, you could feel my body
You could
tension.
track it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I couldn't.
know, and I started to wonder how I'd do that, because it was kind of an uncanny thing, kind of a bit spooky. But we had one person on our training course, and she was standing up behind my head, so I couldn't see her. And she put her hands on my shoulders in the way that I've taught. And the next thing I heard myself say, "Have you got one foot bigger than the other?" And she said, "I do. In fact, there's so much difference that I have to buy 2 pairs of shoes. It was one size for my one foot and one size for my other foot." And I went, "Oh, it's funny. I could feel that by the way her hands felt on my shoulders." And I had to really do a lot of tracking to see how I'd got there in my brain, which fortunately, as an Alexander teacher, I was always watching how the neural pathway turns into a thought, or how the physical thing turns into a neural pathway, turns into a thought. I was always looking for the for what was going on. It's very quick, but I would go back and just sort of think, okay, what was the actual sequence there? And the sequence was that her hands felt different. That's where it began. The one hand felt different. Then I realized the left side and the right side were feeling different, not just the hands. And then I asked my own nervous system, what could this possibly be coming from? And my nervous system delivered the answer. Her feet are a different size. And then that's what came out my mouth. Are your feet a different size? I wasn't going to believe that. It sounded like gobbledygook. It turned out to be factual. And I thought that was a good one because that was so concrete. But it is like that. You can tell what people are doing with their tongues. People have a lot of tension in their tongues. A quick, easy way to get your whole body to relax is to check, are you gritting your teeth? Are you holding your tongue up against the roof of your mouth? Let your teeth come apart. Let your tongue rest in your mouth. Now wait and stay like that and breathe and pay attention to that for about 20 to 30 seconds, which is longer than you'd think once you're really timing it. And then you'll see that all of you has started to shift and change because you changed that, because the way the tongue is the whole floor of your mouth. It's part of your neck and your throat almost. And so if you release that tension in your tongue, it will help your neck to release and your mind to release and your body to release. And how simple is that? Okay, I'm just going to stop gritting my teeth and holding my tongue so tense for 20 to 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm doing it as you say, obviously.
Yes, it's worth it.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk, because people don't understand the amount of training that goes into this. So could you talk a little bit about so if somebody wanted to, so outside of just getting a lesson casually from time to time, let's say somebody wants to become a teacher, like what's required of that person?
Well, at the moment, if you're going to one of the affiliated societies like an AMSAT or STAT training, that's going to be a 3-year training. You have to complete 1,500 hours,
Hmm.
and you need to do it over 3 years. You can't like go every single day and sort of cram those hours in and do them on top of each other. So what's recommended is 5 days a week, 3 hours of training
Hmm.
per day for 3 years,
Yeah.
following a school calendar kind of thing. And I must say that is the best way to train because it gives you time to respond and assimilate to the information. There's a lot of physiological changes
Hmm.
that need to take place. So it's pretty much a maturation process, just like you can take, no matter how intelligent a baby is, and how smart they are and how rapidly they can go through their milestones, it's still going to take 3 years to reach 3 years of age
Hmm.
because there's a maturation process that has to take place. And there's certain things that can only happen in the nervous system over a period of time. And we're talking maturation. We're also talking about the development of clarity about the Alexander technique and so on. So that is a pretty good clarification. So you wouldn't want to do it in less than 3 years of exposing yourself on a very regular and frequent basis to the Alexander technique and learning. But definitely, if you had to extend because you wanted you couldn't do 15 hours a week, but could say only do 10
Hmm.
hours a week, you could extend and maybe do it over 5 years or something.
Hmm.
And I know the societies try and accommodate that kind of schedule, but that's generally what's required.
Hmm.
It's demanding, but you are learning how to use your brain and your consciousness.
Right.
You're learning how to be conscious of consciousness in a very tangible way. You are making that a reality via actual physical things that happen that are quantifiable and that are measurable. It's not pie in the sky, it's not invisible, it's not energy work, which I know a lot about because I do that too. It is a most tangible, visible, quantifiable process,
Yeah.
and it takes that amount of time. And I don't know of anyone who hasn't considered their Alexander training as the most amazing gift
Hmm.
in their lives. And
Yeah.
so, some people come onto a training course as a visitor or a guest for a period of time because they want to immerse themselves in the environment of the Alexander technique and benefit as much as they can, but they can't make that full 3-year commitment or
Hmm.
whatever it is. And it's a very valid thing to do as well.
Yeah.
So, in training to be an Alexander teacher is complex. The only thing that I can liken it to is training to be a psychoanalyst, where you have to really get to know yourself very, very, very well.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like a psychoanalyst of the mind body continuum, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah, whether it's for training to be a teacher or not, I think I'm impressed with that level of practice and the way it's set up because, like you said, you have to go through this developmental practice process.
yes, we once had someone on the course. We once had someone on the course that he thought it was going to be like going to medical school where you get textbooks and you study the
Right.
theory and then you go and teach other people. But
Yeah.
no, you're putting yourself through a process
Right.
and you have to unwind your own habitual patterns
Hmm.
layer by layer.
Hmm.
And that's what takes such a long time. You can't become free and available and mobile and well coordinated in your own neuromuscular system
Hmm.
and your musculoskeletal system. You can't give a person a lecture about that. You actually have to do it. You
Hmm.
can't you can't teach something you can't do yourself. And you, as an Alexander teacher, you can only take your students to what you yourself have
Right.
experienced. So you need that 3 years of experiencing the Alexander technique via your own psychophysical being, your own self. You need that 3 years because otherwise you can't expect to teach. And Walter Carrington said, it's a minimum training. That 3 years is a minimum training, and he's right. And what that means is that when you finish your Alexander training, Then you must go teach. And the next 3 years, you relearn everything that you learned on the training course in the practical, in the field, just like any other training. You can go learn to be a psychologist, you can learn to be a social worker, you can learn anything, but until you do a doctor, until you do your residency, until you do that internship, until you're doing the practical, you don't actually get the full training. You've got to have the practical experiences before the training truly comes alive inside you. And that is how it is with the Alexander Technique. And unfortunately, most people who train in the Alexander Technique don't work enough straight after they graduate. They don't give enough lessons. And so they never, ever develop that last phase, which takes the same amount of time, 3 years of practical internship style training. That's what the next step is. And unfortunately, not everyone who does an Alexander training goes there. They love the course and they love the environment and they love studying. It's hard for them to get a practice together and to actually go and do it. It's a terrible pity. Of course, it's been the highlight of my life and opened so many doors for me, the Alexander Technique. Things didn't stop there for me. I've gone on and I use it, and it's my foundation for living, foundation for my careers. It's a foundation for every single aspect of my life.
Yeah. So, and then you not only teacher trained, but then you went on to train teachers. So,
Correct.
what's more involved in that? Could you explain that
No,
process?
and our training course is dormant at the moment, and I don't know, if it will or won't open up again one day in the future. I miss it so much because that studying that we were doing on the training course, I don't have anywhere to do that anymore.
Right.
And I miss teaching Alexander Technique at that very deep level tremendously. I really, really miss all the things I was discovering and the connections I was making. It is a missing thing in my life now. Of course, I'm busy studying other things at the moment that are equally interesting. But I'm passionate about the Alexander Technique. I love it. It was a lifesaver for me. It truly was a lifesaver because we had very bad patterns in my family. And I'm not the only person who attributes the Alexander Technique as a lifesaver. I know I'm not the only person. Other people have also felt that their lives were saved by it. And I personally am in that category for sure. It's either 7 or 10 years now to be a teacher trainer. And the thing is that it's not number of years, is it? It's number of lessons that you've given.
Oh.
It's how many, because you can have 10 years and teach two lessons a year. Does that make you qualified? I don't think so. But and teachers teach a very variable amount. Some teachers are teaching hardly at all, and then there are others like myself that you can't get an appointment even if you try because we're so busy. That's the thing to remember, is that if you're willing to teach people, and this isn't only about the Alexander Technique, this is for all the work that you do, Bryson. If you're able to teach people, everybody wants a good teacher. Everybody wants their own special teacher. And if you can be teacher with a capital T to some people, you are really contributing to humanity. You're contributing to the planet, contributing to the universe. There's nothing so noble as being able to teach others. And every one of us, our soul yearns for a teacher who understands us and can teach us about our lives and empower us in our lives in a broader way. Than it's not just to do with the topic. And that's what I love also about the Alexander Technique, as well as the other things that you do, is that it's not just about the topic. The topic is a vehicle for something much bigger and much more important to that human soul and that human spirit. And I respect that. And I treasure that.
Yeah, I fully agree. The teacher, to have the relationship with a teacher, a good teacher, is rare and lifelong. You continue learning even out of their presence. Like they continue to teach even when they're
Correct.
not there.
Correct. They kind of sit on your shoulder, don't they?
Right.
And it's a voice, and it's a good voice. It's a not a critical voice, but a supportive voice that
That's right.
helps you make choices and helps you perceive and observe things. So yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah. So maybe we'll go try to get a little bit more clarity on this to wrap up with the technique for people. So we have the inhibition. That's the big door.
Yes.
people need to work with, and that takes just skill and time, right? To know that they're trying to inhibit.
And I think it's that capacity to pause.
Yeah.
And so, I think what we can say to people, a very immediate way to do it is when you feel that hurry on the inside of you, or when you feel that pressure on the inside of you, or anything that's that uncomfortable, any uncomfortable feeling, it's time to stop.
Yes.
Just pause a moment and give yourself a moment, because you don't have to stay on that track. You can switch track
Hmm.
if you'll pause. And so you can put inhibition in straight away, even without any more instruction than what I just said. It's a capacity to pause instead of just pushing on with a pattern that isn't working.
Hmm.
So, yes, inhibition is key to the Alexander technique.
Yeah, I feel like that bit of information right there is like, if you practice that, it will become an art, and you'll just get better.
Correct.
So then, once we have the inhibitory pattern or the inhibition practice down to some degree, then what's the next step for the practitioner?
Then you want to look at what we call means whereby,
Hmm.
and that means breaking things into steps.
Hmm.
And essentially, and because if you just think of it as one thing, then it can be overwhelming and you can say, I don't know how to do that. But if you break it into a step by step aspect, then, or dynamic, then that's your means whereby. So you can say, okay, and it's pretty much there's a book called Bird by Bird, and that was a story by Anne Lamott where her brother hadn't done his project, and so it was the night before, and he had to hand it in the next day, and he had to do a project about birds, and he hadn't begun yet, and he was in tears, and he was overwhelmed, and he was upset. And so, and she tells the story, and then her dad said, well, we're going to sit down and we're going to do it bird by bird. And that broke it into the steps, and that's what you want to do, and that means whereby you break it into steps, and that is empowering.
Hmm.
So that is the next step, is inhibition, then means whereby, and then there's directing. And well, you want intention. The overarching thing before even the inhibition is the intention.
Yeah.
So if the intention is to walk from here to the kitchen, then I can break it down. The kitchen is there behind me, so I can break it down into, my intention is to walk to the kitchen. I have to inhibit this feeling that I can't do it. Of course, I can get up and walk to the kitchen. So I say, okay, so my back is hurting. How am I going to get out of the chair and walk to the kitchen?
Hmm.
Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to uncross my legs. I'm going to lengthen up in the chair. I'm going to pause a moment. I'm going to choose something to support me, and I'm going to go up nice and slowly without worrying about it. So I've already stopped just thinking, how am I going to get out of the chair? And I've broken it into steps. That's the means whereby. And then once I'm up on my feet, now I'm going to be able to walk to the kitchen fine. It's getting out of the chair that's the problem when my back is sore. Okay, but then, so then I've got the intention to do something, then I must inhibit the pattern that's interfering with that, then I must figure out the steps, that's the means whereby, and then I must direct. And directing is simply giving yourself the instructions, like the recipe. Now do this, now do this, now do that. Those are the directions. And there's the package deal.
Hmm.
Intention, inhibition, means whereby, and directing.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing your time with us.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's really a pleasure. You can tell I love to talk about the Alexander technique, and I love to share any stories and snippets that seem to be useful. I'm all for it. Thank you so much for asking me.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure talking to you. We'll